make my life a mess. Make my life a mess, yes, a mess of happiness about you.
Oh my God.
It's 2020 and most of us are locked indoors. Suddenly, social media fills up with loaves of sourdough and banana bread. Maybe you were posting your own beloved baked creations across your social media. Or you thought, well, I'm not a baker, so why would I even try? Or I finally have the time to try. Hey there, my name is Sylvie and I am a baker who has been studying the science, history and fundamentals of this industry whilst also spending many hours in the kitchen baking up cookies, cakes and other things for my website roamingtaste.com. I'm not formally trained, and though I run a baking website, I don't bake bread unless it's no need, and I've never made a wedding cake. Yet, calling myself a baker even in a casual way does not diminish the act of what I do, and I truly believe anyone who enjoys cooking can truly love baking. So today we are digging into the history of baking, why so many people feel so strongly that they aren't bakers, and mentally reframing the act of baking itself. The history of baking. Baking has its roots in sustenance, and most of its history is deeply connected to bread and is even a profession mentioned in the first book of the Bible in Genesis, where Joseph, the son of Jacob, who had been sold into slavery in Egypt, was wrongfully imprisoned alongside the king's baker. Joseph went on to interpret the baker's dream through God's spirit, and let's just say it doesn't end well for the baker. In the book, A History of British Baking, From Blood Bread to Bake Off, Emma Kay notes, the Assyrians, people from Mesopotamia, are arguably the first ever civilization, were baking dough in sealed pots of clay buried underground, quite possibly several hundred years before the Egyptians. The Egyptians developed the first ovens, which were wood burning and made from clay collected from the banks of the Nile. They relied on heat rising into an upper section of a cone-shaped baking chamber. One of Egypt's primary crops was emmer wheat, which is better known in the West today as farro. Emmer wheat is one of the earliest cultivated, domesticated forms of wheat and grew so well it left Egyptians with a surplus to last more than a year. This means that bread was a constant throughout their diets across all levels of society. Egyptians didn't just invent the first ovens, they are also credited with being the first to use leavening of bread through sourdough, which has a link to beer and the yeast within it. As stated in the book Understanding Baking, the Art and Science of Baking by Joseph Amendola and Nicole Rees, the Egyptians were using baked loaves of risen bread to start the fermentation process in beer by 5000 BCE. The yeasty dregs of the beer provided bakers with a reliable, predictable yeast variety that is the ancestor of commercial yeast used today. As with so much of history, what we know today is what has only survived in art or writings. And the profession of baking did not come about until the middle of the 2nd century CE in Rome, as the scholar Pliny the Elder diarized that wealthier families began hiring professional bakers, most of them freed slaves. This was the only trade at this time that was not conducted by slaves, though Britannica.com notes that guilds formed by the miller bakers of Rome became institutionalized during the 2nd century CE under the Flavians. They were organized into a college with work rules and regulations prescribed by government officials. The trade eventually became obligatory and hereditary, and the baker became a kind of civil servant with limited freedom of action. You could say they were almost slaves to baking. This was common throughout the Roman Empire, with writings that survived Pompeii reflecting what a miserable life it was for those within the baking industry and the poor donkeys responsible for grinding the wheat. Moving on to medieval England, the average person outside cities didn't actually have ready access to local bakers, and even wealthier people didn't have the equipment or even the money to bake bread in their own homes. So this brings us to the story of the Anglo-Saxon King Alfred. It goes something like King Alfred was walking through the woods in his military garb, and it was either before or after a battle. I couldn't quite figure that out. If you do know this for sure, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, he's wandering through the woods and he stumbles upon a peasant woman who mistakes him for just being a lowly soldier. She invites him into her home for some rest and nourishment. However, her fire is down to the embers, so she sits him down and gives him one task. task. That is to watch the cakes that are on the embers so that they do not burn, and also to turn them. Though King Alfred, the slowly soldier that she'd mistaken him for, fell asleep almost as soon as the door closed, and obviously she discovered that the cakes had in fact burned upon her return, and she had some very swift words to say to the slowly soldier whom she had mistaken King Alfred for. You gave him one task and he failed. In reality, this story actually came about around 100 years after King Alfred reigned, so the reality of the story is kind of lost to the mists of time. It does actually sound like something that could very well have happened, though it might not have happened to him. However, the cakes that were on the embers were actually a common type of bread that people who didn't have ready access to professional bakers would actually whip up and bake over a fire. In a similar way to today's patisserie owners and bakeries, baking was an incredibly specialist job. Once again, quoting from the book A History of British Baking, From Blood Bread to Bake Off, only 2 companies were chartered prior to 1500 in the city of Chester. That is to say, they were granted exclusive rights and had investors or shareholders overseeing their best interests. One was the Guild of Fletchers and Bowers, bow and arrow makers. The other was the Guild of Bakers. These weren't considerable gangs of bread and pastry makers either. In the 1490s, the Bakers Guild consisted of just 18 members. The average person who resided in higher density living, think towns and cities, had to use their one day off per week, usually a Sunday, to bake all of their bread at a local bakery because they just didn't have the facilities or the finances to create these within their own homes. As Emma Kay notes, that the English nursery rhyme pat a cake, baker's man is commonly associated with this era. The main reason most baking was linked to bread beyond sustenance, though, is because almost all desserts relied on raisins or honey as sweeteners, as sugar was not readily available or was incredibly expensive until the 1700s. Due to this, most desserts we know today come after this period, though there are some notable exceptions, such as baklava, which actually dates back to the 11th century. So back then, most desserts relied on what was readily available, such as in-season fruits, some nuts such as hazelnuts or almonds, some cheesecakes that are not at all like what we consume today. So it wasn't until the ownership of slavery and the plantations in the Caribbean by the British Empire where globalization made sugar readily available to the masses. This allowed for an increase in the creation of baked desserts that either still exist today or simply delighted a few of the wealthier classes back then. Around the same time as sugar became readily available, French cuisine was being highly esteemed in England and pastry became really popular by French bakers. So this all kind of came together around the same time, and so with this, the ability to create desserts became a much bigger element of what made someone a baker. Paula Fagoni shares in her book How Baking Works, years ago there was only one way to become a baker or pastry chef, and that was to apprentice with a master craftsman. The apprentice learned by doing, repeating the necessary skills year after year until the skills were mastered. If bakers and pastry chefs understood their ingredients or why they did what they did, it was only after years of experience. Mostly they knew what to do because they did what they had been shown and it worked. Baking in our psyche. In the article, The Therapeutic Benefits of Cooking and Baking from the Institute of Culinary Education, for those of us who grew up around baking, the smell of something in the oven often triggers a sense of warmth and comfort. The memory of walking into a room as something bakes in the oven with that smell wafting through the air has likely left an indelible mark on your psyche. Maybe it meant that your favorite dessert was in the oven, or you just arrived at your favorite aunt or grandparents' home. If the family baker was one of your parents, then you were the luckiest kid in the family for sure. According to the article, How Bakery Scents Affect Memory, scents we recall from childhood, bubbling rhubarb pie, bread rising on a sunlit windowsill, or molasses and nutmeg in a rich gingerbread, send us swooning over days long since past. As we experience the nostalgia, we feel our mood lift. Most families have that person, the one who is known for being being the baker, they've been around longer than us and they never seem to have any failures in the kitchen. Though if they did, would they even tell us? Because we probably would never ask. They're the one who almost always has something already made and tucked away for us to grab a hold of and bite into almost as soon as we step through their door and say hi. Smelling something baking in the oven can unlock a memory, time traveling our brains to a moment, the people within it, and the familiarity of it all that is both comforting and indelibly marked as a good moment. Within that, we might even remember the pile of dishes stacked up in the sink, or recall that we were asked to help with the next phase, whether that was licking the beaters or helping pour sugar into a bowl that was to make frosting. When we bite into baked goods, we often don't have a memory of the work and effort required that went into it. We enjoy the sweetness, the flakiness, the crumbs it leaves, with the knowledge that it is not as simple as simply making toast. Most of us don't know professional bakers, and though it is very common for us to be able to go out and have coffee and pastry, it's also just as common for us to be able to source ready-made cookie dough or have the items in our pantry to whip up something whenever the craving strikes. And in this way, baking has been made available to the masses it hadn't been throughout most of human history. For many people, cooking, thanks to its less technical requirements, is a time of joy. Like Ashley D. Stevens notes in her article, "My perfect spring cake started with a box mix. Cooking felt loose and instinctual. I could stand at the stove, tasting, adjusting, adding a little more of this, a little less of that, always able to fix it if something went wrong." So much of who we are is made up from what we're taught to lean into or away from. As an example, from an early age, I was told I'm very good with my hands, and both my father and grandmother worked in creative industries. My father has actually been a leather worker longer than I've been alive. So with the simple sentence of Sylvie is good with her hands, I was taught that I innately am creative and it's something that I should lean into, and obviously I found joy in it. It was a form of positive reinforcement for me.
Kid's a natural, I'm speechless.
However, this then meant I had to learn through so many years of failure that nothing came innate to me, and I had to work just as hard as anyone else at perfecting what I enjoyed. These failures never really made me question whether I enjoy the act of baking, and so this is where I think I differ from so many people I meet. The amount of times I've walked into a room with a container in hand, put that down on a table alongside all of the other food people have brought, and then met a stranger and just been told I'm just not a baker is astounding. It seems that most oftentimes people say it like, I'm a pretty good cook, but I'm just not a baker. And so somehow baking fits into this basket of if you're not good at one element of it, then you're just not good at it at all.
Not a baker, so I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm about to do something I swore I'd never do. I hate doing it, and I suck at it. Baking.
And then I remembered why I hate baking. Because I'm so freaking bad at it. I'm so bad at it. I'm just a girl who likes to eat sweets, but I suck at baking. Like, I'm so bad at it.
It's easier to watch. We live in an age of overconsumption and mass watching. Not just us watching our screens of other people doing things, but also the fact that if we're doing something, we should be filming it for others to watch. Food is incredibly personal. From the moment we're born, we connect with our parents and loved ones by them feeding us. And were it not for that food and nourishment, we wouldn't grow and develop. So when people are so certain that they aren't a baker, there might be an element that if they can't satisfy someone with their food, such a basic and fundamental element to being human, then that makes them a failure. Additionally, if we have to bake something for our kids' school, a friend's event, or a bake sale, and we don't enjoy the act in and of itself already, and then that produces failure, well, it just is going to reinforce the dialogue happening in our brains that we're right. We shouldn't even try because we're not going to succeed. For most people, when they Google what is a baker, you're going to come up with a bunch of results around bread, which is fair because, as already discussed, bread has been part of the fabric of humanity for thousands of years. But when you stop and actually think about it, what does baking bread actually entail? Is it like rye, sourdough, no knead? Baking itself encompasses a variety of things, and yet most home bakers aren't the level of British Bake Off and know all of the array of desserts or dishes that are going to be asked to bake in a single season to be appreciated within their family or local community, whether it's their immediate family or their neighbors and loved ones. We also have an endless stream of people on social media who are so successful at what they do, whether it's their professional job or they've spent the time perfecting their craft. Add in terms like chiffon cake or creme anglaise, which most of us don't have ready access to in our supermarkets. It can also make baking feel incredibly unapproachable. So often we see the success stories when they come up on our phones and the thousands of likes, but we don't see the road it took to get there, the disasters along the way, the mistakes, the imperfections, before it pops up in our feeds as a perfect cake, all decorated. From an early age, we are constantly learning. We go to school and then we learn the parameters of how to learn and what failure looks like. So once we leave that environment, there is no clear parameters anymore, and sucking at something can feel overwhelming or discouraging, particularly if life around us is heavy and difficult already. Also, a lot of people don't necessarily leave the school system feeling particularly full of self-worth and intelligence. It can really grind us down. So our brains can connect learning or particularly failing as something to avoid as opposed to seeking out. When we start a hobby such as baking, we can quickly reinforce the idea that we're not good at something instead of continuing to just give it a go. Baking as a hobby. There has been a lot of dialogue recently around people no longer having hobbies, and a few YouTubers have recently done great videos on this. Doothy, Ashley Embers, Shira on the Wall, and Alistair, to name a few, which will all be linked below in the caption. A lot of Gen Z are particularly lacking in hobbies because we live in a consumerist society and we're told that if we can't make money with something, then like why even do it? Or if we can't have the specific product, then why even have that hobby? Whether it's coloring in pens or the product to make something instead of trying out a different similar thing. If you don't have or can't afford a tufting gun, for example, and you've never even given it a go, could you consider doing something like cross stitch first? It's just a thought. This is even true for me though. I went from wanting to share recipes from what had been some amazing solo trips to what is my strategy and how can I niche down? And because I enjoyed it, I leaned in harder. The word hobby literally means an activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure. The essential part of their meaning there is leisure time for pleasure. It's about enjoying the activity, not the sharing of it with others unless you feel comfortable doing so. Hobbies are tough to pick up, whether it's because they're too expensive or they require time that we just do not have or cannot currently sacrifice. Add to this the fact that so many places recommend a list of baking supplies, from tins to types of flour and sugar, that the average baker is just expected to have in their home, and then you're staring down at a high cost for something that isn't actually that healthy and needs more patience than you might have spare. When we factor in the rising costs of ingredients, then the simple act of baking something can suddenly feel even more pointless if you don't particularly enjoy it and now need to fork out $25 for a tin and some ingredients just to make some brownies. However, in a world that is always telling us to strive for more, put more effort in and not be mindful or present and grateful in the here and now, there is proof that baking and activities like it are powerful in helping us live in the present. In the article Why Baking Makes Us Feel Better from Psychology Today, research shows that everyday creative activities like cooking and baking are linked with improved mood and emotional well-being. With this in mind, I'm now going to give a bunch of advice because I truly believe anyone can enjoy baking. But if you just don't have the bandwidth for advice right now, or you just don't want to hear it, that is absolutely fine. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Please make sure that you subscribe so that you're notified when the next video is uploaded, and have a wonderful day.
I thought, even if baking goes badly, it's a bit of fun. It's not. No, not disappointed. Scarred.
Becoming a baker. When we speak about baking, we don't just mean something that requires you to turn on the oven. There are no-bake desserts like chocolate mousse, brioche doughs that can be deep fried for donuts, custards that are cooked on a stovetop like crema catalana, or layered desserts like trifles or tiramisu that, unless you are baking the sponge fingers yourself, don't require any actual baking. So can everyone become a professional baker? No. But are most home cooks going to become professional chefs? No. So it's really about narrowing down our mind view. When we consider the whole baking category, it becomes incredibly overwhelming. It's best to just remove the idea from your brain and think about the one baked good you really love to eat. If someone said to you it's your last meal, what would that dessert be? Now I'm gonna stick with dessert and sweets a lot in these examples because most baking is sweet. But if bread is your thing, just keep thinking of bread as I speak. Really think about your favorite baked good. What is the texture, the flavor? What makes your best version of your favorite dessert special? What are your favorite things about it? I'm going to use brownies as an example a lot here because they are actually really helpful for a number of reasons. Brownies, like a lot of baked goods, aren't all the same. They don't have the same texture, flavor, even ingredients. So really figuring out your best version is actually helpful in specifying what you want to create. Write it down. Be as detailed as possible in your notes. The flavor you're looking for, the color, the texture. If you were going to buy this baked good in a store, what are the key features you would look for that it's one you'd want to try? And what are some things you would think are aspects where you'd just straight up be like, no, I'm not spending money on that. We're going to come back to writing it down, but think of these notes as the foundation that you'll be building on. Food is both personal and a way for us to connect, right? So think about the thing you want to perfect, not just for yourself, but where you love it and you're so proud of it that you want to share it with the people you love. You don't have to be perfect at all baking to be a baker. Now, the cost of ingredients can be off-putting, and if you're not much of a baker, then you're not likely to just have all the ingredients just sitting around in your kitchen. A great cost-saving way to ease in is with boxed versions. They also help you narrow down what you need to pick up in the store so that you can just get home and make those brownies. I'm going to come back to this whole ingredient thing in a second, but the reason for starting with boxed versions is best explained by Ashley D. Stevens again. I learned to bake with boxed mix. It felt safe, the chemistry was already handled. All I had to do was play around with flavor and texture. Yes, someone has done the heavy lifting. Not all of us are lucky enough to have grown up in families where we were welcomed in the kitchen. Not all of us feel particularly confident in our abilities when we step inside this room that requires real effort from us. So boxed mixes are a way to have a helping hand to ease us in. If you can't source a boxed version of your favorite baked good, or you want to make something from a recipe, then Samin Nosrat in her book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat has some wonderful advice that actually applies to cooking and baking. When making a dish for the first time, read several different recipes for the same dish and compare notes. Notice which ingredients, techniques, and flavorings are common to the recipes and which are different. I spend a ton of time on online researching recipes that are both traditional and I've never tried before. And so I've found that there are two things that are best to look for when you're researching recipes. Recipes with the highest number of high ratings that include comments are the best places to start. Except if a recipe has an upvote feature, that is actually the best place to start. Any recipes that have a ton of comments like, I can't wait to bake this, or these look amazing, ignore those, they're irrelevant. What you're looking for are the comments with specific changes or feedback on the recipe. This means that someone has made the recipe and they're providing the feedback that either aligns with or goes against what you're looking for. If there is an upvote feature, the number of upvotes also means that people who have also tested the recipe are either agreeing or disagreeing with that person. What they're doing is giving you advice. With a lack of experience, it is always best to make a recipe as is the first time. However, if you see a bunch of comments that say this was too sweet, or I lowered the sugar by a quarter and it still turned out perfect, you could actually choose to listen to that advice and then also use less resources overall. You've got the recipe, you've got your boxed ingredients, and the recipe calls for butter, but you're going to switch that out with margarine. Or, this is far worse, you have a hankering for brownies and you've found a recipe with a really high rating, and the local store is just a little too far away. So you're going to make do with what you've got on hand. In the book How Baking Works, Paula Fagoni notes, bakers and pastry chefs require a higher degree of accuracy when measuring ingredients than do culinary chefs in the kitchen. Baking requires more specificity than cooking. In that same book, Paula makes this all-important statement. If a baking recipe calls for a specific amount of an ingredient, then it is vital to have that exact amount for the success of the recipe. So much of a successful baked recipe depends on the ingredients. And often when people tell me that they're not bakers, it's because they admit they just don't have the patience required for it. If a recipe calls for baking powder and you only have baking soda on hand, those aren't interchangeable. Baking requires foundational knowledge before you know what you can and cannot change in a recipe, what ingredients you can mess with versus the ones you just cannot. This is where focusing down on one dish is actually incredibly helpful because you're working within parameters of what you don't know, and even if it fails, you're going to enjoy eating it. After all, it's your favorite dessert. Baking is always easiest when you come prepared. Don't try and make changes to the recipe, though. If you don't have a brownie pan, but you've got a skillet, a loaf or bread pan, a cake tin, make that the thing that you're being flexible on without actually changing the recipe itself. Another thing that a lot of inexperienced bakers aren't aware of is that the size of an egg is actually quite a big factor in how a recipe can turn out. Eggs provide so much, whether it's helping to provide moisture and binding or helping with the leavening of a recipe. Though I'm going to specifically be talking about the size here, as most American recipes will simply say eggs, but they mean large ones, whilst European recipes lean more towards medium-sized, I've found. So unless specified, always assume you need large eggs. If you have tiny eggs and it's asking for 2 large eggs, you might need to use 3 in place. So do a little preparation, recognize your lack of knowledge, and work within that, and it makes baking so much easier. We get to the bit where you've made it, you've baked it, you've let that thing cool down, and now you get to taste the reward of your efforts. Remember those notes you took. Pull them out. In what ways does what you've baked meet those requirements? In what ways does it not? Make notes, detailed notes. If the recipe said you had to bake it for 20, but you had to bake it for 25, write that down. This helps. How hot was your oven? If the recipe called for butter and you used margarine, what is the taste? The after aftertaste, the texture. Do you enjoy that? Is there something that you would change in this recipe in future? Write those down as well whilst it's all fresh in your mind. In some cases, you'll be close to exactly what you're looking for, and in others, you'll need to make a variety of different recipes for that same dish to find your perfect version. But again, it's your favorite, so you'll enjoy consuming it. There's a scene in the movie Julie and Julia right near the beginning where Julie Powell has had a crappy day and she decides to make chocolate cream pie and declares,
I love that after a day when nothing is sure, and when I say nothing, I mean nothing. You can come home and absolutely know that if you add egg yolks to chocolate and sugar and milk, it will get thick. It's such a comfort.
Julie says this because she knows this fact through and through. That's the knowledge she's gained. And likewise, you can become a baker by truly knowing what you love to eat, by focusing on making that dish to its perfect version for yourself and recognizing what your knowledge boundaries are within that. If we love something, we always have time for it, so it won't feel as much of a chore to make it, and you might surprise yourself once you've perfected it to then go and challenge yourself with another dish, or not. That's okay. If you just have one dish that you're known for, that is absolutely fine. It's summarized perfectly by Ashley D. Stevens when she says, baking was never the problem. The problem was thinking I had to get it right. But it turns out, like anything, it gets easier when you stop worrying about perfection and just start playing. The point of all this work, that aunt or grandparent or even your parent who's known for being the family baker, they didn't just wake up one day and become that without failing. If you spend enough time making, baking, and sharing your favorite dessert with your favorite people, then one day before you realize, someone will request you bring them to the office for your co-worker's leaving party, or a friend will ask for you to make that for a special occasion. They will be too busy enjoying your baking to turn around and ask whether you're a baker, because they'll believe it, and so will you. So this is all I have to say about baking. I think I said that word probably 800 times. And if you've gotten to the end, thank you so much for watching. I've had to actually reshoot this video because I did not have good audio the first time, but I'm also getting over a cold, so I don't sound the best. Please like, share, and subscribe so that I can make more videos about our favorite desserts and this whole industry. And in the meantime, I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Ka kite anō and tschüss.
Honestly, it's pretty good. The texture is bad because it's like breaking, but it tastes good.
So some of you guys wanted to see the cinnamon and brown sugar. It looks like it turned out okay, but let's cut it open. Moment of truth. It turned out so good. Oh my goodness.